Hey everybody, this is Gloria Norwood, owner of Sophisticated Spot Shop on Etsy.com, owner of Gloria's Unsolved Mysteries Oracle Deck, Volume 1 through 40, and owner of Gloria's Astrology Tarot at www.makeplancards.com. And like I said, I was on video 200, so since we're doing exploration of Africa, it's going to go into a continuation of part 2, because, girl, the tea in here is so good and juicy. I'm like, dang, they had scammers back then, eh? Right? They had scammers even back then, y'all, hundreds of years ago. Imagine that, right? And it says, let me see. I was on the part where it was telling me who was born. Yeah, I've done that part, I believe. I was like halfway in the middle of like the timelines. So it was like 1848 was through 1852 was Livingston's first exploration of Africa interior. It said 1852 through 1856 was Livingston's second voyage. And it said 1855 Livingston sees Victoria Falls for the first time. And it says 1856 John Hannigan Speke and Sir Richard Burton began their search for the source of the Nile. It says 1858 Lake Tanganyika discovered by Speke and Burton. I ain't gonna discover something that God already made, but okay. It says exploring West Africa. Okay, just wasting time. All right. It says exploring. What they say, sitting on the dock of the bay, wasting time. Cause that's how they did. Y'all re-exploring something God already did. Okay. So y'all wasted a lot of y'all life trying to discover something that was already here before you. Just let it be. You just supposed to be staying in your area. Y'all gonna go all around and say, it took you a whole 2 years to even get around the city, right? To get around the whole, get around the damn country. So you knew that it had to be a greater power, a higher power, right? Most definitely, ain't nobody but God, right? Almighty in heaven, right? Because they have dark lords in the underworld, we know that, but they also have hierarchies, like higher ones, starseeds. Right, you're right. So if you really pay attention to things, then you know for sure these things were here before we all got here. These are just old stories that people try to reconquer something that was already here. It's kind of funny, just listen to it. So we'll get right back into it. It's like 4 or 5 more pages, but it's interesting. It says exploring West Africa. Much of the West African coast was very well known to the Europeans by the 19th century. It was due to the Portuguese explorers of the 15th century that this whole area had been thoroughly mapped and charted until the building of the Suez Canal in 1869. The only viable way for the Europeans to reach Asia was by sailing around Africa. This meant that the whole of this part of the West Africa was very important, since whoever controlled it could have some control of the sea route to Asia. There they go, trying to control something that God already created, okay? And it says it was also from this part of Africa that Europeans took slaves to work on their plantations in the Caribbean America. See, there we go, with that narcissistic behavior and that trying to control people, right? This is really sad. No, it's not right, it's wrong. So they took people, they moved people from their homes to make them work for them. And that's wrong. You're not supposed to do that. That's just being fucking lazy. Y'all love saying black people lazy as a motherfucker, but we do all the fucking work, right? So they lying. And then they sit there and underpay people. Probably them coins, I keep telling you. These people were giving coins. I don't give a damn if anybody mad. These people were giving coins for a yearly salary. Y'all got me fucked up. Period. It was so disrespectful to our culture. It was also from this part of Africa that Europeans took slaves to work on their plantations in the Caribbean and America. By the end of the 19th century, it was the British and the French who controlled the coastline. Explorers of both countries began to travel into the interior of West Africa. Meeting the Hassa in 1822, the Scottish explorer Hugh Clapperton crossed the Sahara Desert to Lake Chad. He then went on to become the first European to come into contact with the Hassa people of the northern Nigeria. After a short trip home, he returned to find where the Niger River flowed into the sea. He died near Sokoto in April 1827 without achieving his goal. Frank claims the Congo. Le Petit Journal. It says the most famous French explorer of Africa, Pierre de Brazza, was an Italian aristocrat by birth who took French citizenship. He explored West Africa for 6 years in the 1870s and 1880s. As this picture showed, de Brazza convinced many African leaders to accept French influence in the area. And it says from the east to coast. So he was an influencer, okay? He was the one trying to tell people what to do. And trying to make the trends or whatever, set the trends, I guess. It said from east to west, the English explorer Rene Levert Cameron was the first European to cross Africa from east to west. In 1873, he led on an expedition to search for the explorer David Livingstone, finding him dead. Finding him dead, my ass. They probably sacrificed him. They was big on sacrifices back then. Finding him dead, Cameron went on to the Zambezi and Congo rivers. Here he is shown being recovered by Congo region. Now, I'm not going to say they didn't have sicknesses and illnesses and AIDS and stuff because they was getting sick and didn't know what it was. And what they call it, monkeypox and they had all kind of stuff. Well, measles, mumps, rubella, they were really getting that stuff over there. So, I want to say it was a few more diseases they would get that was very life-threatening, you know? And so I know that some people they can't find dead because they be over there starving. But also, you know, it just didn't make any sense the way they just treat people, just walk over dead bodies like it's nothing, right? And just sacrifice these people just for their own personal gain is just ridiculous. And it says exploring southern Africa. Of all the parts of Africa with which Europeans came into contact, it was southern Africa where these presence was felt most strongly from the moment Bartolomé Diaz accidentally sailed around the Cape of Good Hope in 1488. The strategic importance of this whole region was instantly recognized by every seafaring European power. The Portuguese had not been interested in colonizing southern Africa, so it was the Dutch who were the first to settle there in the middle of the 17th century. They became known as Boers, which comes from the Dutch word from former. By the 19th century, other European colonists began to arrive, especially from Britain. Tension began to arise between these different groups, and as a result, Boers moved further into the unexplored areas of the South Africa. Oh, okay, so he said, I got to get deep. They used to fight in boats. Okay, you gonna get in a boat and fight like, nigga, I'm throw a rock over there. They play too much. The Dutch Eastern India, and they used to put cannons in their boats. Like y'all ride around with guns, they put cannons in their boats. So then you have the Dutch East India Company. The Dutch East India Company, and look, and when the cannon hit their boat, the boat sank like battleship. I'm not about to play with y'all. That's how you know that's the boys, that army toys, right? It said the Dutch East India Company. The Dutch East India Company was established to conduct Eastern trade, and in turn created the Dutch Empire in Southeast Asia. In the 17th and 18th centuries, it controlled all commerce between the Dutch Republic and the East. A colony on the Cape, the Dutch settled at Table Bay to grow vegetables for passing ships, to build a hospital for sailors, and to repair ships. Jan van Riebeeck's first fort was modern-day Cape Town's first building. It was to become the first town founded by Europeans in southern Africa. And it says the Dutch colony begins in 1652. The Dutch East India Company gave in to repeated petitions and recommendations from their ship officers and decided to establish a post at Table Bay at the bottom of Table Mountain. They sent 3 small ships to Dromdarius, Regifer, and Goderhout under the command of 23-year-old Jan Anthony van Riebeeck, a ship's surgeon, to establish a stronghold on the shores of Table Bay. So these people fighting in ships, okay? They got in these ships to start fighting against each other. They play too much. And then I told you the ships get to sinking. So I don't know what they was thinking, okay? The Great Trek from you gonna go get on the boat and fight and you can't swim. The Great Trek from 1835 to 1843, like the Boers began an epic journey that became known as the Great Trek. Over 14,000 people left Cape Colony and moved inland to set up new colonies. In Natal, the Orange Free State, and the Transvaal, the Great Trek took place for two reasons. The Boers were looking for new pastures for their cattle, and they were unhappy with British control of Cape Colony, especially after the British abolished slavery in 1883. During the Great Trek, the Boers came into conflict with Native Africans, especially the Matabele and the Zulus, who did not want these new arrivals on their land. I don't blame y'all. They said, get the hell out of here. They said, get the hell out of here. We all fool with y'all. What y'all come over here with this bull crap? I don't blame them. Arriving at the Cape Colony had originally been colonized by the Boers, like the one shown in this picture. When Livingston area, I'm just gonna move in and walk in your trap, take over your trap shit right here. These people they was like, we ain't having that, we finna stab y'all, period. It said Cape Colony had originally been colonized by the Boer, like the one shown in this picture. When Livingston arrived in March 1841, Cape Colony was under British control. He moved north and started his missionary work. By 1848, the urge to travel was too strong, and Livingston joined an expedition to cross the Kalahari Desert. They became the first Europeans to reach Lake Ngami in modern-day Angola. When Livingston returned to his home, he wrote to London announcing the news of their discoveries. And it says, working at the mill, Livingston started at a cotton mill next to his house when he was 10 years old. He read constantly and soon decided to become a doctor. In 1836, he managed to get to medical school, in Glasgow. While he was there, he became interested in the work of the London Missionary Society, and he decided to do missionary work in China. The society accepted Livingston, but sent him to southern Africa instead. And it said, like, you ain't go up here, you gotta go to the south side. Okay, I guess. He said, okay, I guess. It said, growing up in Glasgow, David Livingstone was born in 1830. That's these spirits. They like to talk to me. They're kind of funny. But then you got the ones that's just being funny. It's still a while they childish. You have growing up in Glasgow. David Livingstone was born in 1813 and was brought up on the edge of Glasgow. He shared a single room with his parents, 2 brothers and 2 sisters. The room was about 15 feet. Although this seems small now, at the time it was regarded as being quite comfortable. From soldiers to journalists, in 1862, Henry Stanley joined the Army. He soon found himself fighting in the American Civil War on the side of the Confederates, who were to later lose the war. Stanley was wounded in his first battle and taken prisoner. After he recovered, he became a sailor and later a journalist. He worked for the New York Herald in Europe and Africa. In 1871, he was sent to find Livingston. Stanley and Livingston. This is the story of Stanley and Livingston. There have been many great pairs of explorers, Burke and Wills in Australia, Lewis and Clark in America. In Africa, it was Richard Burton and John Speke who found the true source of the Nile. Yet the most famous pair of explorers must be David Livingstone and Henry Stanley. Despite the fact that they met only once and spent just a few months together, between them they opened more of Africa to the outside world for anybody else. But their reason for being in Africa couldn't have been more different. Livingstone was there to spread the Christian gospel and to help put an end to slavery. Stanley came as a journalist seeking the great story of his career. Who is Henry Stanley? Henry Stanley's real name was John Rowlands. He was born in Wales in 1841. The year that Livingstone arrived in Africa, his mother was an unmarried teenager who did not want him. He lived with his father and then moved into a workhouse where he received a basic education. When he was 15, he sailed from Liverpool to New Orleans, where he started work in a shop owned by a man named Henry Stanley. It says Livingstone's family joins the expedition. This picture shows Livingstone and another expedition in 1851 to explore the rivers around Lake Ngami. He took with him his pregnant wife and their 3 children. In this picture, Livingstone is holding the hand of his son Robert. In August, he arrived at the mighty Zambezi River. He decided to explore it further, and then his family returned to Britain. In June 1852, he returned of his greatest expedition. And it says, when Livingston set off on his second expedition in June 1852, he had little idea that he would not be seeing his family for 4 years. He did not know he would not travel for about 5,600 miles through parts of Africa that he had never been seen by any European. On this expedition, he explored more of the Zambezi River and was the first white person ever to see the Victoria Falls. When he returned to Britain, he was a national hero and easily founded the money for his next two expeditions. In 1858 and 1866, during this last expedition, Livingstone was away for so long that most people in Britain assumed that he was dead. The New York Herald sent Stanley to discover if this was true, and their meeting is now one of the most famous in history. After 5 months, Stanley returned to Europe to tell an expectant public of his adventures. Livingstone remained in Africa and died there in May 1873. The death of Livingstone. When Stanley left Livingstone in March 1872, he left behind a sick and weak man, but Livingstone continued with his travels for another 8 months until he died on May 1st, 1873. His African companions, including his servant Shuma, pictured here, had preserved his body and carried it over 1,200 miles to the coast. Livingstone was buried at Westminster Abbey and mourned as a national hero. Victoria Falls. From 1852 to 1855, Livingstone had been following the Zambezi River downstream. Frequent illness and low supplies often slowed the expedition down. However, on November 16, 1855, Livingstone saw the Victoria Falls. The local name for the falls was Wasai Tunyai, which means smoke that thunders. Livingstone decided to remain in Africa, the British Queen. Fighting the slave trade. One of the main reasons that Livingstone returned to Africa was to fight the slave trade. His determination to rid Africa of this evil was strengthened in July 1871 when he witnessed a massacre of over 400 Africans by Arab slavers. It was Stanley who brought back news of this massacre, and the strength of public opinion forced the British government to take action against the slavers. Ironically, Stanley became notorious for treating his African supporters harshly. They put them in chains to stop them from running away, and many died accompanying him. Stanley and Livingstone met. Led by an African carrying the American flag, Stanley traveled almost 500 miles inland from the East African coast. As Stanley approached Ujiji on the shores of Lake Tanganyika, he was told that a white man was staying there. Stanley changed into his cleanest clothes and walked into Ujiji. He stepped up to Livingstone and said, "Dr. Livingstone, I presume." It's like 3 more pages, but these are fun facts, so yeah, I like to read. So give me a second. It says essential equipment for African explorers. Whenever European explorers arrived in Africa, they were stepped into the unknown. Explorers had to travel across the varieties of landscapes that is Africa. They could find themselves in a seemingly empty desert, a foul-smell swamp, or thick rainforest. Even with Africa guides, they did not know what dangers and obstacles they would have to face. To overcome these problems, and since these expeditions sometimes took several years, explorers had to take several tons of equipment. Carrying all of these and sharing the dangers were native courts and who followed the expedition. Carrying a gun. 2 of the dangers that were faced by explorers were attacks either by wildlife or either by native people who thought they might be slavers. Therefore, a gun was a useful tool for both dangers. Stanley often made use of the elephant gun he is carrying in this picture. The explosive bullet was powerful enough to destroy a small boat. Although most animals kept clear of the teams of explorers, Livingstone himself was once attacked by a lion. Using a compass and sextant. Since much of the exploration and the interior of Africa was done by river, it may be not surprising that explorers used the same kind of navigational equipment used by sailors. This compass and sextant were used by Livingstone during his travels along the Zambezi River. The compass was used to discover the directions in which the explorers were going. The sextant measured the angles between 2 stars and the horizon to establish their longitude. The menace of the mosquito. The great menace faced by the African explorer was the often fatal disease of malaria. which in 1888 was discovered to be transmitted by mosquito bites. Oh, they also transmit AIDS too. However, the explorers didn't know that quinine could prevent malaria, and many of them took some of their expeditions, and probably COVID too. I'm not even gonna lie to you. This is why I don't go outside at a certain time with all these when mosquitoes be out. It says carrying the equipment. When traveling by land, explorers depending on African porters to carry their equipment. Neither Livingstone nor Stanley traveled with less than 20 African porters, and most explorers had over 50. These men and women would carry loads of around 100 pounds, day after day. And it says explorers' clothing. European explorers did not even dream of wearing the same clothes as their African porters, and many of them wore clothes that were similar to what they might wear at home. One exception was the pith helmet, which was developed by the British Army in India. It was made from compressed plant fibers and had a deep brim. Some helmets had ventilation holes that helped to keep the head cool. Crossing waterfalls. When explorers came up against such barriers as rapids and waterfalls, they had no choice but to carry the boat around to an obstacle. This picture shows porters carrying dugouts, canoes along the Congo River, And then it says, see, I can say like maybe 4 pages later. Then it says, the African timeline. 1858, Speke finds the source of the now Lake Victoria. 1858 through 1864, Livingstone explores the Zambezi River. 1860 through 1863, Speke returns to Lake Victoria with James Grant. 1861, Siri Samuel and Florence Baker follow the Nile south and discover Lake Albert Nyanza. In 1866 through 1863, Livingstone's last voyage. Through 1868 through 1874, Gustavo Achitago became the first European to travel through the Sahara Desert. 1873, David Livingstone dies. 1873 to 1875, Rene Lovett Cameron is the first European to cross Africa from east to west. 1874 through 1877, Henry Stanley explores the Congo River. And then it says, Carl Thangberg. It was because of 2 men that the wonders of Africa were that the wonders of Africa's living world were brought to international attention. They were the Swedes Carl Thunberg, picture here, and Andreas Sparrman. In 1782, they traveled to the Cape of Good Hope. On arrival, they headed for Table Mountain, and in the space of one day managed to collect over 300 specimens, many of which they had never seen before, providing medicine, because they had lived in Africa for thousands of years. Many Africans had developed a natural resistance to many diseases, such as malaria. However, this resistance did not offer completely protection, and there were many other diseases such as yellow fever and cholera, to which Africans had vaccination was a practice started in English in 1796. This picture shows European doctors giving vaccinations to African children. Stanley made sure that all of his porters were given quinine, which helps protect malaria. So it's called quinine. And then animals as trophies. Hunting has always been a central feature. Don't get cute, little spirit, because we got a spirit that likes to swing. Because they know I swing back. FBI knows that too. Anyway, animals as trophies. Hunting has always been a central feature in the lives of many Africans. It was essential for survival, and even the first European settlers hunted for food. The Boers were responsible for, that's probably somebody at MCC that lied about my education and said I was stupid as shit and didn't want to process any of my homework. So now, since they see I'm on YouTube actually reading, then they know that their teachers up there were lying, as they usually do. Anyway, it says, animals as trophies. Hunting has always been a central feature in the living of many Africans. It was essential for survival, and even the first European settlers hunted for food. The Boers were responsible for extinction of the quagga and Khan zebra. For later settlers, hunting for food was less important than hunting for sport. The most popular hunting areas in the 19th century were Kenya in East Africa and Zambia in Southern Africa. Ain't it just like a white person to stop a person from being educated? Right, so you gonna make sure you fail all my classes, but when I ask you for help, you don't respond. You give me tests that last like 2 seconds, but everybody else stuff is wide open to take the test like every long as they want to. Can't tell me that ain't prejudice, right? And it says drawing the wildlife. Today, most people hunt African animals with cameras. And I already had to go to the dean on another teacher before, right? Because she locked me out of class during the exam. Like, lady, I paid my money like everybody else. Did you lock me out during the exam because I was smart as fuck? I'll tell you about that school. Metropolitan Community Colleges, y'all are racist and prejudiced, and y'all need to be sued for y'all behavior. Today, most people hunt African Americans and African animals with cameras rather than guns. But in the last century, cameras were rare, because I can read my ass off. So that you knew for sure they was lying about a lot of shit. Were rare, and naturalists could only shoot or draw the animals that they saw. Many of the naturalists who came to I graduated at 16. Like, that's why I'm like, oh, they're being funny. They're being real funny and very jealous. Today, most people hunt African animals with camera rather than guns. But in the last century, cameras were rare and naturalists could only shoot or draw the animals that they saw. Many of the naturalists who came to Africa, like William Patterson or Cornwallis Harris, were also talented artists. Their drawings and watercolors beautifully captured the colorful variety of Africa's natural world. So yes, they used to have somebody come to Africa and paint these animals, like the pretty pictures that we see, they come and paint them for real in real life. So that's very beautiful. Excuse me. We got one of these fake ghosts that want to act. That's probably one of U.S. education. That's sad. When you sitting there gang stalking somebody for years because they smart as fuck. Following the explorers, science, and recreation, the flora and fauna of Africa remaining a mystery for centuries. It was believing that the bones of lions were as hard as a flint and created sparks when struck together. It was said that the rhinoceros killed its prey by knocking it down and licking it to death. Elephants always stirred the water with their trunks before drinking because they could not bear to see their own reflections. Yet, as with so much of the Africa, the truth managed to be even more unusual than even these stories. Naturalists and scientists who came to Africa were amazed by the variety of wildlife that they encountered, and they hurried to take. Yes, yeah, hold on, give me one second. Y'all owe me $1,200. Yeah, Metropolitan Community College, because I'm very educated, and I know damn well I was turning in my homework. Right, so I got an F in everything in all four of my classes. Right, we know how far the gang stalking goes, and they were all white, and they were all prejudiced. Now let's get back to that. Like I said, naturalists and scientists who came to Africa were amazed by the variety of wildlife that they encountered, and they hurried to take specimens home. William Burchell, an English naturalist, returned from South Africa with thousands of specimens, including 265 bird skins and over 120 animal skins. There were other Europeans who were interested in the animals of Africa. They were not scientists, but hunters who entertained themselves by shooting the wildlife. Not you entertain yourself by shooting the wildlife. Right, fucking murderers. It says plant hunting. Many of the naturalists who came to Africa were not interested in the animal world. Cape Colony in South Africa was a treasure trove. From all botanists, there were plants that attracted insects with the odor of rotting flesh, and others that flowed only at night. The picture above shows the protea, the national flower of modern South Africa. A woman in Africa at a time when women were not expected to look much further than their homes. Africa lured some expecting women explorers. Perhaps the most famous is Mary Kingsley, who interested in the new animal species, explored much of West Africa. She lived with native people there and was the first European to visit parts of Gabon in 1894. Yes, they owe me some money too. Following the explorers, religion, and economics. Many of the Europeans who followed in my footsteps of explorers were not interested in discovery, but I bet you if his other baby mamas was going to school, they get straight A's, right? So this is what happened when you having a code leader who makes phone calls when you trying to educate yourself to get your kids back. And all y'all gonna work together against me. You too, sis? You too, mama? Wow. You know what I'm saying? This is how you know when people really don't want you to be successful. Right, while I'm trying to get my kids back, everything just failed all at once. Come on, right? Right. Many of the Europeans who fought, and I was talking to, and I was always like this, just like I am right now. This is our class. We used to have a class, and he would sit there and like really be really nonchalant, rude, disrespectful. And even the students was doing the shit. Like, why are you even mentioning my case in class? You're a criminal justice teacher. You're not even supposed to be talking about my case trying to throw subliminal fucking shit, right? But all my shit, and then he gonna tell me, why don't you just guess on the answers? Why don't you just go to hell? Right? Fake ass. Many of the Europeans who followed in my footsteps of explorers were not interested in discovering new lands and new peoples. In the 19th century, it was sincerely believed that the European or American ways of life, because he is gonna go to hell though. Just let him know. Because the way he's prejudiced towards black people, he's definitely going. A lot of them are. All four of them are going. Because they was all white. I just want to see how they was going to act. In the 19th century, it was sincerely believed that the European or American way of life was superior to anything else yet. So, Metropolitan Community College in Kansas City, Missouri. Y'all some liars. Y'all be scamming black people out their education and out their money because you mad when people got money. So because you know how everybody get a Pell Grant return. So now y'all want y'all money back after y'all intentionally failed me and kind of smiled about it and thought it was funny because I'm still going through this case. I'ma sue y'all. Y'all need to be sued. Period. And it says, they try to say I couldn't read, I didn't know nothing. I read a whole fucking book. So we know y'all lying. And I ain't got no tutor here to help me. I got spirits to keep bothering me. But not no tutor. It says, many of the Europeans who follow in the footsteps of the explorers were not interested in discovering new lands and new peoples. In the 19th century, it was sincerely believed that the European or American way of life was superior to anything else that existed at the time. When some Europeans looked at Africa, they saw a continent that appeared to be empty of agriculture and industry. Others were concerned with changing the people of Africa, who they saw as primitive and superstitious. Right, you want to change people, right? Exactly. They believed that if this people could be controversy to Christianity, that Africa would be more civilized. So many Europeans come to Africa in order to develop this underdeveloped continent. Some of these new arrivals saw opportunities for themselves, but all felt it is necessary to impose their ways and beliefs on those they saw inferior. But I would sue, if y'all lawyers wasn't crooked too. Straight up. Spreading the word in several years. Right, because they all on the police side. They all crooked as shit. So how you gonna ever get anything solved when everybody, I'm not gonna take your case, I'm not gonna take your case, because they're all corrupt and in the Illuminati. It's fucking sad. It says, spreading the word in several European countries and in North America, missionary societies were formed in order to try to convert Africans to Christianity. David Livingstone was sent to Africa by the London Missionary Society. Most of these societies worked with a little money, and they had to rely on missionaries who traveled around in tents. A Scottish missionary, one of the best-known missionaries in Africa, was Robert Mumford. He was sent to South Africa by the London Missionary Society in 1816, and he stayed for over 50 years. He encouraged Livingstone to explore Africa, and later Livingstone married his daughter Mary. Introducing crops. European farmers, because you got to slap somebody with a little education sometimes. Introducing crops. European farmers began to introduce crops into Africa that were more profitable than native plants. Many of these new plants, such as the peanut, sweet potato, or the cocoa bean, are shown here, originally came from the Americans. These crops are still important to many modern African countries. Building an African church. Today, there are about 160 million Christians in Africa. They are roughly divided between the Roman Catholic Church and the various Protestant churches. Africa is home to the largest church in the world, the Basilica. So I guess it's Basilica of Our Lady of Peace, and Yamoussoukro is the Ivory Coast, was completed in 1989. It was a total of area of 107,000 square yards and can seat 7,000. The challenging of Islam, the Islamic faith had already made many converted in Africa. When Islam spread across North Africa in the 7th and 8th centuries, it also spread southwards to these areas, these borders that bordered to the Sahara Desert. The East African coast had been dominated by Arab traders for centuries, and the Muslim faith was very strongly rooted. Looking for precious stones in February 1867, a 15-year-old boy, Erasmus Jacobs, found a shining stone on the bank of the Orange River. It was a diamond. Within 15 years, South Africa was produced more diamonds than any other part of the world. Introducing agriculture. For centuries, Africa practiced a form of agriculture called slash and burn. A small area of forest was cut down and burned. The area was then farmed until it was no longer fertile and then abandoned. It was then gradually reclaimed by the forest. This method of farming began to vanish with the arrival of European farming methods. Now, one thing I want to say is, this is the reason why they don't like black people, Black Panthers, right? Because we could read our ass off, and we would find out what the fuck they did to us, right? We back being aggressive. And they back saying, oh, no, we didn't do it, no. We'll give you your reparations, we'll give you your 40 acres and a mule. We didn't do it. Yeah, you did. You try to affect somebody's education. And that's a big thing when it comes to being a Black Panther. They do that to black people. They don't want us to know anything because they know they are always up to something. And as soon as we find out what the fuck that meant, because we got to grab a dictionary, then we know we've been had, right? Inflation? Okay. The carving up of Africa. Who thought up of inflation? Probably a white person. The 19th century, I bet you they look right in the dictionary. It was like, we gonna find a word that means steal, but they ain't gonna know what that means. Right? That means rising of prices. Because who said so? Right, thieves. Anyway, the carving up of Africa. The 19th century Europe was changing fast. Nations that once depended on agriculture for their wealth now rely on industry and manufacturing. In order to grow more prosperous, Europeans searched for new ways to sell more of their produce and find cheap raw materials to make their goods. This is what happened. They killed a lot of our ancestors and took over a lot of our stuff. So all these stores and all these connections that they have, they really belong to black people. So it seems like they killed royal bloodlines to go back to being fake and saying, oh, I'm Queen Elizabeth. Oh, I'm Prince Charles. And the Queen is standing right here in your face. Didn't they die? Where Queen Elizabeth? Where Prince Charles? Where all them at? Where Princess Diana? I thought so. Would they say black excellence? Black don't crack. Right. Anyway, it said Europeans searched for new ways to sell more of their produce and find cheap raw materials to make their goods. Explorers have shown that the interiors of Africa was more than likely rich the resources to be exploited. The European countries made sure that they could control the African market by taking over large areas of the continent. You damn thieves. During the 19th century, Europe saw the creation of 3 new countries, Belgium, Italy, and Germany. These 3 countries looked to Africa as a way of proving that they were equal to any of the older nations like France and British. And as Africa was carved up by these European powers, nobody stopped to wonder what the people of Africa actually wanted for themselves. And my grandma was German. My grandpa was black. I'm still trying to figure out how they met. Right? And how did they blend and get like that, right? And I'm like, Germany. And he black. Oh, Lord. Here we go, right? 19th century. Right? African divided says this map shows how the European nations divided up Africa among them. Nick, y'all just gonna put your own lines on Africa. Whenever you feel like it, right? Lord. Belgium kept the Congo. France had most of West Africa. They think they could trade off God's property like baseball cards. Okay, this is another reason why probably God is pissed. Belgium kept the Congo. France had the most of West Africa. Britain had a large share, including most of southern Africa. Germany, Portugal, and Spain also took chunks of the land. Where do you take the chunks of the land to? I'm not about to do these damn thieves. By the end of the 19th century, it's just a whole organization of thieves. That's a shame. By the end of the 19th century, that there were only two independent African nations, Liberia and Abyssinia, which is now Ethiopia. The Berlin Conference, King Leopold's action in the Congos prompted other European powers to lay claim to much of the rest of Africa. Sometimes these claims were a source of argument between the various nations. In 1884, a conference of European nations was held in Berlin to sort these disputes out, and Africa was formally divided. In this picture of Africa looks on helplessly as his destiny is decided by European leaders. Wow, there they go, trying to decide people's destiny, right, Judge? Right, prosecutor? I tell you about these demons, they get in everywhere and get to prosecuting some shit, right? African resistance. Many Africans did not want their lands to be ruled by Europeans. And right, they're fueled by hate and anger and jealousy and greed. And that's sad. It says African resistance. And some of these people ain't even did the crime. They just doing the shit because they don't want to go to jail. They want a high conviction rate. Fucking crazy ass people. African resistance says many Africans did not want their lands to be ruled by Europeans, and resistance was widespread. However, they could not do little against heavily armed or disciplined armies, and hundreds of thousands of Africans died. One of the most formidable opponents the British had to face were the Zulus, who were finally defeated in 1879. One more page, y'all. Two, actually. Rhodes, the Empire Building. Cecil John Rhodes was a British politician who did more than anybody to bring Southern Africa under British rule. In 1890, he became Prime Minister of Cape Colony and used his power to weaken the power of the Boers. As the picture shows, he dreamed of creating an empire from the Cape to Cairo. He invaded the lands of the Shona and the Bibi, people in what was later called Rhodesia. King Leopold of Belgium, Leopold II hired Henry Stanley to carve out an empire for him in Central Africa, which he called the Congo Free State. He claimed it was to advance the cause of the abolition of slavery. By the 1880s, it was clear that Leopold's real motive was to develop a rubber industry there, and that Belgians were themselves actually cruelly towards the Africans in the Congo. Oh, so he gonna pretend like he coming to help the Africans, and then try to build a warehouse to make them work. Boy, I tell you about you damn liars, right? You gonna make yourself a king and make everybody work for you, and you ain't even royal bloodline. I tell you, just gonna people that lost their damn mind. That's all what had happened. They had went mad. Oh, I discovered pottery. Oh, I discovered saffron. Oh, I discovered silk. Nigga. No, you didn't. Now, some people did invent some stuff. Like I invented my cards and stuff. But you understand what I'm saying. Give people their credit. Right? The Boer War. You didn't make the God. You didn't make the world now, did we? God did that. So when you were right here talking about, I discovered, you ain't discovered nothing. It was already there. You just now looking at it. The Boer War. When gold was discovered in South Africa. Well, another thing, there they go, gold digging. When gold was discovered in South Africa in 1884, thousands of British settlers came to make their fortune. Resentment between these newcomers and the Boers eventually turned into conflict, and in 1899 the Boers declared war on Britain. It took 3 years for the British army to finally defeat them. And it says Africa timeline, 1878, the Zulu king Cetshwayo is defeated by the British forces. And it says 1879 through 1880, Joseph Thompson explores Lake Tanganyika and Rukwa. In 1883 through 1884, Joseph Thompson becomes the first European to cross modern-day Kenya. In 1884, the Berlin Conference is held. In 1887 through 1889, Stanley's last expedition to Africa. In 1893, Mary Kingsley explores parts of the Congo. There they go trying to act like they found something. Mary goes to that. Mary Kingsley talking about she explored parts of the Congo. It was already there, lady. Modern day Gabon and explored by Mary. Through 1894 and 1895, modern day Gabon is explored by Mary Kingsley. Tired of you white people putting claims on something that don't belong to you. Shit. It said 1899, Mount Kenya is successfully climbed by y'all. Y'all claim kids, y'all claim whole buildings, y'all turn around trying to claim whole bloodlines, whole royalty bloodlines. And if y'all can't claim the bloodline, fuck, you just gonna go make your own crown and stick it on top of your head and change your name. Crazy white folk. As they used to say. 1899, Mount Kenya is successfully climbed by Sir Halford Mackenzie. In 1904, Stanley died. I tell you, people that lost their damn mind, didn't they? Africa Today. In February 1960, the British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan gave a speech to the South African Parliament in Cape Town. He spoke of the new African nationalism that was sweeping through the continent. He said the wind of the change is blowing through the continent, and this growth of national consciousness is a political fact. Those winds had started blowing after the end of the Second World War. The Allies who fought to allow European and Asian countries to choose their own governments. Africa began to ask why the same should be not true for them, and demands for self-rule become louder. Sometimes the Europeans handed over power without the struggle. Sometimes Africans had to fight for independence. Since the 1950s, every African country has managed to become independent. However, it was only in 1994, when South Africa became a democratic country, that the continent was returned to the people to whom it had originally belonged before the explorers came. A symbol of pride, in 1965, the white ruling classes of Rhodesia declared themselves independent of Britain rather than allowing democracy. African resistance to this was led by Robert Mugabe and Joshua Nkomo. In March 1980, additional international pressure forced the Rhodesian government to hold elections. Mugabe's ZANU PF party won, and Rhodesia became Zimbabwe. The last outpost after the Second World War, the South African government passed a series of laws that made the black population second-class citizens in their own land. Damn. This system of government was called apartheid. Black South Africans struggled against this injustice both peacefully and with weapons. In 1990, Nelson Mandela, the leader of the African National Congress, was released from prison after 27 years. In April 1994, the first multiracial elections were held in Mandela. Aged 75, became president of New South Africa. The future of Africa. Africa has to face many of these same problems as the rest of the developing world. Every African government has twin problems of improving the living standards of their people while copying the growing population and increasing environmental damage. The estimated population of Africa is 763 million. By 2010, this will rise to 979 million, and by 2025, it is projected by 1,228 million. This is mostly because nearly half of all Africans alive today are like these children in Nairobi, under 15 years of age. Conflict in Africa. Many of these newly independent countries had borders that had been created by Berlin Conference. Different groups of people that have lived separately for centuries suddenly found that they now live in the same country. This has been one of the main reasons for the civil wars that have become a way of life in several African countries today. Africans working together. This picture shows Nelson Mandela being held down from a platform by other African presidents after adding the Organization of African Unity in June 1998. The organization was founded in 1958 and existed to help African countries finding common solutions to common problems. The first colony to become independent after the end of the Second World War was the Gold Coast till 1957. The name of the country was changed to Ghana soon after independence. Kwame Nkrumah became the first African leader of the new African country. And it says, so they're asking questions about what we just read. So anyway, we finished the whole book. I know it took like an hour and a half because, we got to know about our black people. Can't be a Black Panther without knowing about what they did to us, right? And like I said, when, you get people, it really makes me upset that you have people that just, don't give people a chance just because based off what you heard and what you think you know and who you thought I was, right? Well, what they say, please don't judge me, right? Don't judge people. Thou shalt not judge, right? Who shall ever we be with sin cast the first stone, right? So, what are we doing here, right? You can't judge anybody. But I'm glad you enjoyed the book Explorations of Africa, because we here, right? That's where we from. Where they stole us from, where they steal every fucking thing. Anyway, I'm hoping everybody learned something from this, because I did. First time reading this book. Slammed it, aced it, okay? So, I like the fact that everybody can come together and just listen and enjoy, and hopefully it'll make you guys think about the manipulation, the slavery, the gaslighting, the gang stalking, and how you guys have adapted to the European culture and disrespecting your own kind. So, like I said, how can you be a Black Panther, disrespecting your own Black queen, right? So, with that being said, like, subscribe, and notify if you're interested in my videos. My cards will be available at www.makeplancards.com if you're interested in those as well. They're $24.99 plus $8.99 with tax. Like I said, we have Gloria's Unsolved Mysteries, Oracle deck, value 1 through 40, and Gloria's Astrology Tarot. So you have 41 decks to choose from. So don't be shy. There's plenty other decks for other people. So support the artists, support the movement. So thank you and have a blessed day.